Hey everybody, thanks for joining us this afternoon as we're kind of still in this craziness going on, still not back to our normal routine. First of all, let me say thank you to Preacher and everybody else for giving me the opportunity to share some stuff with y'all. I don't take that lightly. It's very important to me to really give credit where credit's due. I wouldn't be able to share had I not had, the teachers and those people in my past to get me where I am today. So thank you, Preacher, for the opportunity, and everybody else who, kind of shared their wisdom with me. Also, I'd like to thank everybody who's behind the scenes doing stuff. Justin, Derek, there's a bunch of people. If you try to name them all, you're going to forget a couple. Being able to keep us running with the music, stuff going on Sundays, choir, doing the online virtual choir, that's really, really cool. Also the people doing the food bank, as that's a great resource for people in the community. Don't be afraid to take advantage of that resource that we have for you. What I want to do today is I want to share with you how to share. What I mean by that is I want to give you just a couple teaching tricks and tips and try to all tie it in with a little lesson at the end. For some of us, we are, for the very first time, having to do Bible studies with small groups. Maybe you're only used to studying by yourself. Maybe you're used to being in a Sunday school class instead of teaching a Sunday school class, or being part of a Wednesday night Bible study instead of a teaching Bible study. So that can be a little intimidating if you're not used to it, especially sharing your own thoughts. That can be a little bit scary. What I want to try to do to you is give you what I do to kind of prepare a lesson. Now, I'm not saying that my way is the only way, or that my way is the best way, or that my way is great. I'm just saying that personally, this is what I do. And what I like about it is that you can make it as simple or as complex as you really want to make it. And it's really good for personal study. I know sometimes teaching tools and personal studies don't go hand in hand. For me, like a lot of other people, we've been in church since before we were born. When we were in the womb, our moms and dads had us at church. And you can only read the same story so many times before it starts to, unfortunately, kind of get repetitive. Jonah gets eaten by the fish, and then goes to Nineveh, and everybody gets, and you read Jonah gets eaten by a fish. Jonah gets eaten. How many different ways can you take apart something from Jonah gets eaten by a fish? So I was starting to get burnt out personally in my personal study and preparing for Sunday school classes. And then I kind of altered how I looked at things, and it really helped me out. So I'm going to try to share that with you today. The example we're going to use is the man with palsy that Jesus heals. We see this in Matthew 9, verses 2 through 8. We see this in Mark 2, verses 1 through 12. And we see this in Luke 5, verses 17 through 26. That's where we're going to be. Now, because of time constraints, people in my Sunday school day would know I would probably make this like a 6-week deal. We'd go into crazy detail, but we don't have that time. Nobody wants to sit through a really long video. So I'm going to try to be respectful of your time and keep this as compact as I possibly can. Let's read it first. Luke 5, verses 17 through 26. Verse 17 says, "And it came to pass on a certain day, as he was teaching," he is Jesus in this case, "that there were Pharisees and doctors of the law sitting by, which were come out of every town of Galilee, and Judea, and Jerusalem. And the power of the Lord was present to heal them. And behold, men brought in a bed, which was a man which was taken with palsy, and they sought means to bring him in and to lay him before him. And when they could not find by what way they might bring him in because of the multitude, they went upon the housetop and let him down through the tiling with his couch into the midst before Jesus. And when he," again being Jesus, "saw their faith, he said unto him, Man, thy sins are forgiven thee. And the scribes and Pharisees began to reason, saying, Who is this which speaketh blasphemies? And who can forgive sins but God alone? And when Jesus perceived their thoughts, he answered, saying unto them, What reason ye in your hearts? Whether it is easier to say, Thy sins be forgiven thee, or to say, Rise up and walk. But that ye may know that the Son of Man hath power upon the earth to forgive sins, he said unto the sick of the palsy, I say unto thee, Arise, and take up thy couch, and go into thine house. And immediately he rose up before them, and took up that whereon he lay, and departed to his own house, glorifying God. And they were all amazed, and they glorified God, and were filled with fear, saying, We have seen strange things today." So that's our story. I don't really like to call them Bible stories, because Bible story kind of goes hand in hand with fairy tale. When you hear story, you think something that's not true. We know that the Bible is a true and accurate account, so we're going to call it a Bible account of what's happening. When we break things down, the first thing I like to break things down into is information. Information can be broken down into three pretty basic categories. Who's there, what's there, and how's it all happening? So let's start with the who's there. We see that there's a lame man that gets brought before Jesus. We see Jesus. We see the four friends carrying this lame man. We see the Pharisees. Now, if you're doing a basic lesson or you're just studying on a basic level, you're a new believer, you don't know how to quite do a huge deep dive, you can leave it there. Or you can really break down what is palsy, this man with the palsy. What is that disease? You see the word palsy used a couple times in the New Testament, and sometimes it means different things. We've gone through a lot of medical breakthroughs since the early ADs to where we are now. We've had 2,000 plus years to kind of figure some stuff out. So what exactly is palsy? Jesus, what is he at this point? Has he started his earthly ministry? At what point is he in that? The friends, do we know anything about the friends? It's kind of vague. You can look at the other accounts, see if we can find any more information, but pretty vague on them. Who are the Pharisees? Or the doctors of the law that we see? Who are these people? What do they do? What are their jobs? If you want to get a little bit more in depth, you can find more characters, so to speak. You can see the crowd. You can see the homeowner, right? Somebody's got to own this house Jesus is in. These are all people who are going to be reacting to this situation. A lot of us, we grew up with the flannel graphs. At least if you're in my age group, you remember your Sunday school teacher, your Wednesday night teacher had this big plastic bag full of all these little characters, and there were disciples and Mary and baby Jesus and lambs and a camel and all sorts of fun stuff. And they would put it up on their flannel graph so you could get a visual of the story back before the days of PowerPoint and all that fun stuff. And it was really, really helpful to help us visualize what's going on. Oh, man, I can see this. I still very vividly recall having a Sunday school lesson when I was really, really little of the guys who get thrown into the fiery furnace, and they're walking around, and Jesus is in there with them and all that fun stuff. And I still vividly recall seeing that with the flannel graphs. Now, that's absolutely great. The issue with that mindset, the flannel graph mindset, is that it's very static. It's not an active situation. You only get to see the people on the flannel graph. You don't really get to see the other characters or the other people involved in this account, like the crowd, for example, or the disciples that might be there at the time, or individual people in the crowd. You don't get to see these people. So as you start playing out the who portion of the information, you can start digging a little deeper into who exactly are these people? What are their backstories? Where do they come from? How do they get there? Now let's look at the what's going on. Now from reading it, it's very simple. I'm going to break it down super, super simple. Lame man got brought before Jesus by his friends, number one. He got saved, he got healed, and he got sent away. Pretty cut and dry, right? Now you can dig even deeper. There's more stuff going on. There's more what's going on once you dig a little deeper. You see that Jesus is teaching. That's why there's a crowd here. Jesus is healing. That's why there's a crowd here. He's beginning to round up his disciples. If you read a little bit before in some other chapters and a little bit after in some other verses, you'll see that he's starting to round up his disciples. We'll get into that portion in the context in just a little bit. So what's going on? Like I said, depending on who you're sharing with or what your spiritual maturity is, if you just need the milk of the word, get that. If you're ready for the meat of the word, dig in even more. Now let's get to the how. Now the how is pretty easy. How did they get the lame man in? They lowered him through the roof. How did Jesus save him and heal him and send him away? Jesus just spoke to him. How did the man depart? In obedience. Pretty cut and dry there on the how. So as of right now, we have our information. What happened? Who was there? How did it happen? Now let's get to the context. Now, context is extremely important because the Bible is a really, really big book, and there's a lot going on. It covers a lot of subject matter, and people can cherry pick verses here and there to really hit home whatever point they're trying to drive. You can pick a verse out of the Old Testament that makes it sound like a verse in the New Testament doesn't apply, and that's not true. We know the Bible doesn't contradict itself. So context is super, super important. Context provides us with insight into what's going on in the story. Now, the three questions I like to ask when I get to the context portion, once I've gathered all my information, is where is this happening, when is this happening, and why is this happening? I like to start with my wheres very, very close. We see, where is this happening? In somebody's house, right? There's a big crowd. They had to break the roof apart to get the guy in. It's happening in somebody's house. Let's zoom out a little bit. Where's this house? This house is in Capernaum. We do a little bit of digging. We find that it's in Capernaum. Where's Capernaum? Let's zoom out even more. Oh, it's part of Israel. What's going on in Israel at the time? Let's zoom out even more. Part of the Roman Empire, right? Rome had kind of absorbed them at this point. Where's Rome in relationship to the known world? At this point, a good chunk of it, right? So you can do an in-depth study on what's going on with Rome and how that would affect the politics of Israel. What's going on inside of Israel and how that would affect the politics or the workings of Capernaum. What's going on in Capernaum that would affect the livelihood or the financial status of the person in this house. The next portion I want to get to is, when did this happen? Now, I don't mean like, 8 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock in the morning, not like that. Even though sometimes we actually get that information, depending on which biblical account we're looking at. I'm talking about, when did the story happen in relation to kind of what's around it, right? So we know Jesus has just started his earthly ministry. We learned that by reading beforehand. Jesus is just starting his earthly ministry. He's not been involved in it that long. He's just gotten Peter as his disciple. They did the whole fishing thing, got Peter, and he's on his way to go get Matthew. Matthew's on the way next. You can see that in verses 27 through 29. He goes gets Matthew after this. So he doesn't quite have the full entourage of disciples with him. He's just now starting in his early ministry. This can provide some context as to why the Pharisees are acting the way they are. We'll see that a little bit later. Also, we want to look at, when did this event happen? So not just the account of what happened biblically, but when did this event happen historically? What's going on in that time period? The governing body, what's going on there? What's going on with the Israelites being able to kind of rule themselves with the king, even though Rome is in charge of them at the time? You can really do a deep dive there, or if you're not ready for it, or if you're teaching people who that's going to go way over their heads, you don't have to get into that portion. Lastly, in the when, what happens before and after? Now, conveniently for us, they cut up the Bible into books and chapters and verses. That's not how it originally came to us. It was just books, right? It's really hard to say, hey, turn to Luke, that portion where the lame man gets healed. Remember where they lower him down, and then you got to spend 20 minutes in church, everybody flipping, trying to find it. So they were smart and put in chapters and verses to make things a little bit easier. Now, unfortunately, because there's chapters and verses, we like to put a bookend at the end of every verse. You know, you get to verse 17, that event's done. 18, that event's done. 19, that event's done. That's not accurate. Remember, these books are living portrayals of what's happening at the time. So don't just read, I'm going to read a section of a chapter. Read the whole chapter. See what's going on. Read the chapter before. Read the chapter behind, right? It's the rule of real estate. Location, location, location. Figure out what you're reading and what's before it and what's after it. And that can kind of give you some insight into when this was written. And then that will give you insight as to why this is written. So we've gotten our where. We've gotten our when. Now let's get to our why. By why, I don't mean why did the author write this down. Okay, we know that the Bible is inspired. It's God-breathed. They wrote it down because God wanted them to write it down. That's why it's in here. I mean, what lens does the author have on when the account is being told? That might sound like a weird statement, but let me explain. Here's a fun little game you can play. In college, I had an English professor that was trying to teach us what worldviews were. We were having some difficulties really figuring that out. And she made us watch this little 1-minute, 2-minute video. Can't even remember what it was about. A little 1-minute, 2-minute video on YouTube. And have 5 of us in a group, and then we would each describe to the other 4 what happened. And then we would compare what some people thought was worth mentioning, what some people thought was worth leaving out, and how that could really help us explain a worldview. So that's kind of what's going on. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they're all the Gospels. They all give an account of pretty much the same time period. However, each one has some stuff that the other one doesn't have, and vice versa. Now, we know that this account is in Matthew, it's in Mark, and it's in Luke. To understand the lens that the author is using, you have to kind of understand the author themselves. So if you look at Matthew's account, Matthew in chapter 1, verses 22 and 23, and chapters 2, verses 5 and 6, and chapters 3, verses 3, Matthew, you can really see his lens, his worldview that he's looking at this Christ account in. He wants to paint Jesus as the King of the Jews. In the very first part of Matthew, it's very Old Testament-esque. This person was father, this person was begat this guy, that guy, that guy. A historical account chasing Jesus all the way back through the Jews so that they know he is their Messiah. He's their king, he's the Messiah, he's what was prophesied. You can look at that, and then when you read Matthew's accounts, you can read knowing, hey, this is what Matthew was trying to bring home. When you look at Mark, for example, chapter 1, verse 15, Jesus is painted as the Son of God, but not just the Son of God as a servant. He's here to serve us. He's here to help us get us where we need to be. And when you look at Mark's account, that kind of makes sense. We're going to skip Luke for a second because we're in it. We're going to go to John. John, just the very beginning of John, right? Look at the very couple verses of John. John is painting Jesus as I am, as God himself, right? So anytime you read John, kind of look at the lens that John's trying to put something through. So we've got Matthew, he's the king and the Messiah, and Mark, he's the servant and the Son of God, and John, he's I am. Well, what does Luke say? In Luke 1, verses 3 through 4, I'll actually flip over there really quickly. It says, "It seemed good to me also, having had perfect understanding of all things from the very first, to write unto thee in order, most excellent Theophilus, that thou mightest know the certainty of those things wherein thou hast been instructed." He is trying to give cut and dry information. Hey, this is what happened. I'm trying to give you an account. And through that account, Luke is trying to show that Jesus is the Savior of mankind, right? Luke has, we don't do much in Luke except for the Bible story. You see a lot of, the Bible story. You see a lot of the birth, Jesus' birth in Luke, right? Luke 2:52, right? All the Luke stuff. It's more than just Jesus' birth. He's trying to show Jesus as the Savior of mankind. So once you understand why the authors wrote in the manner that they wrote, you can get a little bit better understanding. So now we have our information, we have our context. Now let's go to application. Now, you can make a lesson just about information. Super great. I love to do it in our Sunday school class. Brian does a great job of it in our Sunday school class. You can make a whole lesson out of just context. You can put information and context together and make lessons. But most of the time, especially with younger individuals and especially with new believers, we want to really hit the application. What does this information and context put together say to me? Now, there's lots of different applications for every story. I'm going to give you a bunch of them just for this. For example, we see the faith of the man with palsy, right? It talks about it in the passages we read that he knew Christ alone could save him, so that applies to us. Christ alone can save us from ourselves. Let's look at the fortitude of his friends. There's a whole lesson you can teach about how godly friends will literally drag you to Christ if that's what it takes. Are we being godly friends? Are we doing that? Are we seeing our either unsaved friends or our friends who aren't doing what they're supposed to do? Are we literally dragging them to Christ, ripping off the roof if we have to get them to him? Let's look at the crowd. Hopefully in the next couple of weeks we can reopen. And I'm hoping we have a packed house, right? Miss seeing you guys, miss hanging out with y'all, miss the fellowship. We should have a ton of people here. We should have a whole crowd of people here. Imagine sometimes when there's revivals going on or a special speaker going on. There's all these crowds of people here. This crowd was so concerned with getting help, whether for their physical needs or their spiritual needs, they were jam-packed on Jesus. And there was no way to get into the house. Were they doing anything wrong? No. They were coming to see Jesus. There's absolutely nothing wrong going to see Jesus. But they were so concerned with themselves that they overlooked somebody else in need. Make sure we're not doing that. Make sure that we're not so concerned with getting our spiritual, our physical, our financial needs met that we forget about people who are worse off than we are. Let's look at the Pharisees. Now, Pharisees get a bad rap. Every now and then I feel bad for these guys, but every now and then because they do some not nice things. The Pharisees did what any logical person would do. This guy kind of shows up. Remember, this is early Jesus' ministry. This guy shows up and says, hey, I'm forgiving people of their sins. And the Pharisees go, no. Right? That's some false teaching right there. Nobody can do that. Now, you got to remember, the Pharisees spend their whole life studying the Scripture, and they should have known that Jesus was the Messiah. And Jesus kind of sees into their thought process, and he says, all right, let's get these guys. Now, the Pharisees weren't necessarily calling Jesus out because they were concerned with his validity, but they were doing it because they were concerned with their status. These people were very, very important to the culture, and if they're getting knocked off of their high horse, so to speak, it wasn't going to be a pretty fall. Jesus kind of gets into their heads, and you see that he heals the man to show them that not only can he forgive people of their sins, he can heal them. Are we like Pharisees sometimes? Do we have a doubt in God? Do we doubt that Jesus can take care of our spiritual aspects just because we haven't seen him take care of our physical aspects yet? That's one example we can take from the Pharisees. The other is, do we judge other believers for trying to do God's work? Now, I know in this case the other believer was Jesus himself, but sometimes we look at somebody and go, they can't help. That person's not going to be a help. They're not spiritual enough. They're not this, that, and the other. Let's not be Pharisees. Let's get off our high horses and try to help. Obedience and action. Here's a really good one you can take away from it. This guy has been paralyzed pretty much for most, if not all, of his life. He gets lowered through the ceiling, which is probably not a fun experience. I try to imagine 4 of my friends, if Jace and Ricky and Travis and Justin all had to carry me on a gurney from Piedmont to church and lower me through the roof, how well that would work. Imagine it would be a lot of fumbling, and they wouldn't be very happy with me and me with them by the time we got there. This guy has gone through a lot. That day, he's gone through a lot in his life. He gets lowered through the ceiling. Jesus forgives him of his sins. He heals him, and he says, hey, go back to your house. And the guy gets all his stuff and goes back to his house. I know me personally, I'd probably be like, hey, Jesus, my legs just started working. I don't really want to wear them out. Can I just kind of hang out here for a little bit? I just got saved. Let me try to learn something from you. Let me kind of hang out with you. A lot of times we do that. We get a direction from God. We get a directive, and he says, hey, go do this. And we go, well, I'm working through something right now. I'm not exactly where I want to be, how I want to be. So once I get all this stuff straightened out, I'll take care of it. He just said, no, go. And he went. The one I really want us to take away from this is our spiritual needs being met. With all of this crazy stuff going on right now, a lot of us are hurting physically. Some of us were having issues before all of this stuff. There were people struggling with cancer, infections, aches and pains. I know me personally, if something's not broken, torn, or bruised, I'm pretty surprised, if I'm being honest. We have a lot of physical stuff going on. And then all of the corona stuff happened. Some of us were struggling financially, and then all the corona stuff happened. Maybe you went from having 2 incomes in your household to just 1 or none, and we're hurting. And we're coming to Jesus with our problems, which is absolutely fine to do. There's no problem with that at all. But we're overlooking some spiritual issues that we have, whether it be not being saved in the first place, whether it be not living righteously in front of others, whether it be having a little pet sin that we like to keep in our back pocket that, we're going to be good with everything else except this little pet sin. I want to hang on to it. And Jesus is not only able, he's willing, he wants to solve those spiritual problems. Remember, when this man came with the palsy, he didn't necessarily come with the goal of being saved. He came with the goal of having his physical and financial needs met, right? This guy was a beggar. He couldn't take care of himself. He couldn't work. If he could walk, he can work. He can take care of himself. He came to Jesus with a physical and a financial problem, and Jesus solved his spiritual problem. Shocking. It shocked the Pharisees. It probably surprised this guy when Jesus said, hey, your sins are forgiven. This guy probably went, what? Right? No, we see that he had faith and that Jesus was willing to heal him because of his faith and saved him because of his faith. We need to have that same faith. Not that our physical or our financial needs are going to get met, because they will. Jesus said himself, hey, I take care of the sparrows. Hey, I take care of the flowers. I got you covered. But that our spiritual needs are being met. I'd like to thank y'all for listening to me. I know that it can be difficult to sit down and find a time slot when we're at home with a lot of stuff to do to sit down and look at this. I'd like to once again thank everybody here for all the hard work they're doing. I miss y'all so much. I look forward to seeing everybody again really soon. Please don't be afraid to ask anybody in this church for help for anything. If you're hurting physically, financially, spiritually, any of those things, call somebody, text somebody. You have no excuse that you can't get in touch with everybody. We all have got Facebook and cell phones. You can get in touch with us. Let us know if you need help. There's no shame in needing help, especially in this time. Church members who are doing great. Some of us have not been affected by this nearly as badly as others. Now's your chance to be the church in action. Instead of being the passive church sitting in your pews, now's our chance to be active, to seek out people who need help, to get them what they need, and show them the love of Christ.
Hello, Victor Chapel. Thanks for tuning in to our live stream. I wanted to come to you tonight as we close and give you a few updates on what's going on here at Victor Chapel. Some people have asked, what does it look like in the next few weeks? What is our reopening date? And so we wanted to kind of make that clear to you tonight. I want to first say thank you for your support. Thank you for understanding during these times. We've had to make decisions that have been difficult, that haven't necessarily been what we wanted to do, but we felt like that was for the best interest of our church, of our people here, and we wanted to protect you. And we thank you so much for understanding and supporting us through all of this. We had a meeting this past Monday night with our leaders, our deacons and leaders, and we had a great meeting, some great men, and we came to a tentative date of May the 31st of reopening this building on May the 31st at 11 a.m. Things will look different that day. The service will be a little different, and we're going to give you more information in the next week and a half. We'll come back with some more information on that. But we wanted to let you know right now that we have a plan in place, and that's going to be for May the 31st to reopen. So pass the word along to your family, to your friends, to your other congregation members, and make sure you let people know for the next 3 weeks we'll continue doing our live stream. And then on May the 31st, we'll open back up, and we're looking forward to a great day worshiping that day. And so be ready and be listening. We'll give you some more very, very important information on what that Sunday looks like and what you can expect on that day. Thank you, church. We love you. We're praying for you and looking forward to the time that we can see you again here very soon. God bless you.